we on? We are live. How early are we? What time is it exactly? I can't see. I don't know what time it is. Maybe we'll give it 1 minute for others to join us. But thank you, everybody, for showing up to what is basically the first one of hopefully several live chats that I'm going to be doing from probably here. This is my basement, or I don't know if it's a basement, but I have a split back. So I'm right here on the Magnetawan River, and I just thought, I had some great live chats around Christmas. I did like one a year, and I had some comments saying do some more, and so I decided to give them a shot, and so that's why we're all here. So I'm hoping that I'm going to see you again potentially next Thursday if you like this one. Hopefully you do, and I'm going to talk about different topics every Thursday, and who knows, maybe it'll kind of evolve into a bit of a podcast too, which would be super exciting. Anyways, I just wanted to we'll wait another minute. I guess what this is going to be about in general is a lot of people are starting to think about breakup, and they're starting to itch for breakup, and they're looking at plans. So this is going to be essentially about spring trips, planning spring trips, and I'm going to be fielding questions as well during this whole time. So if anybody asks questions, I guess in the realm of spring paddling and fishing trips would be the way to go. Any kind of trip is fine, but the kind of spring trips I know most about are spring whitewater paddling trips and backcountry trout fishing trips. And I'm going to jump right into it, but first I'm going to enjoy a delicious Tread Lightly by Muskoka Brewery, who I'm actually partnering with on these videos. So if you got one, crack one. This is actually a really good little beer. I'm excited to be working with a local brewery, which is pretty cool. This is Tread Lightly, so it's a light beer, but it tastes like... Sorry, what was that, honey? Oh, North, out of here. North is behind me whining to get outside. Go on, boy. Go on, you're ruining my sponsor plug. Outside, go on. Other outside. Should I just let him out here?
No, I'll let him out.
I'm going to let him out here because he wants out desperately. Well, that was a little so real. Anyway, so Muskoka Brewery out of Bracebridge, Ontario, makes a bunch of delicious kind of beers. I really like this one because it's a light beer, and it tastes like a full body beer. But I love the logo too. It's got like a hiking boot, and it's got people canoeing and fishing and on a river. So it really just fits with my whole talk today here. So that's exciting. So yeah, excited to enjoy a beer. And again, talking about trip planning, I guess we're just gonna kind of jump right into it again as we get in a little further. If you have any questions that are going to be in the realm of spring trip planning, by all means, please throw them at me. I'll answer kind of as many as I can. So, when we're talking about, I got some notes here. When we're talking about, we'll jump into kind of backcountry trout fishing. Spring trout fishing is typically for speckled trout or brook trout. And the reason is because at that time of year, the water temperatures are cooler in a lot of places, and they come up into the streams and rivers. And so they can be caught more easily, where at summer, they go basically into the deeper holes into the rivers or the deep parts of the lake and the thermocline about 15 feet deep, or they find a spring, which they'll congregate around a cold water spring in the summer too. But in the actual spring, the time of year, they're moving into the shallows, and that's a great time to get out because you can catch them at the base of rapids. You can catch them, in front of beaver lodges and at the base of beaver dams in areas where they just won't be a little bit later in the season. But there's some things that you kind of got to think about before you head off on a trout fishing trip in the spring. And first of all, you got to know when it's breakup. So you got to keep your eye on. So a lot of the time when people have trips booked on areas that might not be public land areas, say they're in a park or something like that, remember, you book that trip a little too early and it might keep getting bumped because the ice isn't off the lake. So you kind of try to guesstimate it. And then you might ask yourself what the best time to go is. Well, spring's good. Ice out is great. And of course, lake trout fishing is great at this time of year as well. But sometimes if you're there right after ice out, it might not be as good as if you wait a little bit longer. Now, it is great because there's no bugs out when you go early. But the reason that brook trout can be caught in the shallows is because they head into the shallows. And typically they're feeding off of black fly larvae on the rocks because black flies lay their eggs in fast moving water. And then in the spring, and and that's why the trout are coming into the shallows to feed on them. So unfortunately, once the black flies are out, sometimes the fishing's a little bit better for trout when you're in the rapids. And usually at that time of year, what you want to be casting for them with is spinners. MEP spinners is my go-to. Other kinds of spinners people use as well. That some go a little deeper depending on what you like. Panther Martin's another one. I go with MEPS. They have a MEPS deep runner that's a little bit better. So earlier in the season, they're actually a little bit deeper. And sometimes we're catching them at the base of rapids as opposed to right up in the rapids. And a good thing to use, I found at that time of year, is a rubber leech with a weighted hook. Not a jig head, but actually a hook that has a little bit of a weight right on the stem of the hook. And you can rig that leech up in what they call a Texas rig. Tough to explain, but that can get you down deeper right at the base of rapids into those holes. And that's often where you're going to catch more earlier in the season before the black flies have laid their eggs in the moving water. So I've heard it said, when the dandelions are starting to, when the flowers are starting to turn to sporing, or when they're starting to turn into those little floaty things. That's the botanist in me talking. But right around that time when you see the dandelions starting to do that, you know that it's a good time to go and fish for some trout in the rapids. So that's pretty exciting time of year. And the lake trout too, I've heard that the lake trout fishing gets better as opposed to right after ice out, right as soon as the black flies start coming out. But a lot of people swear by ice out, and that works too. Definitely most of the time they haven't had as much pressure in the backcountry at that time of year. And so the reason, one of the reasons that people love spring trout fishing is because they're hard to get to. Technically speckled trout aren't in areas that have had a lot of pressure. Unfortunately, they don't do well. A lot of traditional speckled trout lakes have been stocked with smallmouth bass. A lot of the lakes that pass where a train is. Back in the day, they didn't really realize that they'd essentially destroy a speckled trout fishery by introducing bass to it. So they kind of stocked all those lakes, and a lot of lakes in places like Temagami, places like Algonquin Park, where they had these beautiful trout fisheries, kind of got destroyed, or just locals not realizing introducing bass, and they can't really cohabituate. Trout or brook trout are also they don't do well with acid rain. They can only lay their eggs in water where there's kind of basically gravel with a welling up spring underneath. So very, very specific. And they lay their eggs in the spring, and that's a lot of the time when all that snow that has a high acidity content melts into the lakes and rivers, and so therefore, typically there's a higher acidity level right at the time where they're laying their eggs, and it can negatively impact the population. So invasive species, negatively, as well as bad weather. Black fly only spawn or only lay their eggs in clean water. So areas where there's pollution is going to negatively affect the trout because of their eggs, but also because of their food source in the spring, black fly larvae. Now, if you're in somewhere like the Labrador, where the black flies are just horribly bad all summer, right through into September, horribly bad black flies, because it never really gets cold enough at night to kill off the black flies in places like Labrador. So therefore, the black flies are just laying eggs like crazy. One time I was in Labrador and I went like this and I killed 56 black flies with one clap. 56 black flies. It was bad. My friend Marty, he was wearing this like bug jacket, and he actually ended up getting what I believe is more bugs in the bug shirt than outside of it, because he had so many holes ripped in it, because he cheaped out and bought like a crappy one. But the water there is also cold. So because of that, because of the food source, that's why Labrador is like the mecca, pretty much northern Quebec, but Labrador is like the mecca for brook trout fishing. They get up to like 10 pounds up there. And you can catch them like that pretty much all year long. Some places to go if you want to get into it, you'd be surprised. I would. It's no secret, but yet still it produces. Is Algonquin Park is amazing trout fishery. Now you have to work, because again, a lot of Algonquin Park, there's a fairly big population around Algonquin Park, and to get into the good fishing waters, you got to portage, you got to paddle. But that's like, a lot of people make a pilgrimage around where I live. A lot of people are right into that spring trout fishing, and it's addictive. I gotta say, I get it. I get why people want to do it, because you look at the map, you think, where are we going to catch that unbelievable trout of a lifetime? And it's a mission to get in there. You get in the backcountry for 5-10 days, sometimes even more, and you paddle around, you set up on a lake, you move, and it's just very beautiful, freeing, crisp air at that time. Place to be, and after a long winter as well. Always the best one, the yummiest one, is the first one you eat. They're probably my favorite between that and pickerel or walleye is my favorite kind of fish. Another place that's amazing is for brook trout fishing is the North Shore Lake Superior. Lake Nipigon gets what they call coaster brookies, and they're essentially an anadromous freshwater species. So just like you have rainbow trout and then you have steelhead. Steelhead are essentially anadromous rainbow trout that initially lived in salt water and then would spawn in freshwater tributaries. Well, those ones, for whatever reason, are way bigger because they're swimming around the ocean. Then they run up these rivers and they spawn. Whereas the rainbow trout, rainbows, steelhead are still rainbows. They're just anadromous rainbows. They're way bigger. But the resident rainbow trout are on average much smaller. It's funny, in Lake Ontario, you get these migratory walleye. The migratory Quinty in the fall are way bigger than the resident ones. Dolly Vardens, you have anadromous that are larger than the other ones. The interesting thing about it now rainbow trout have been stocked in the Great Lakes and have become naturalized. They don't need to be restocking. They can spawn and live, so they're naturalized there. There's another word for it. Anadromous is when they live in salt water and they spawn up freshwater tributaries. I think there's another word for when they live in freshwater and spawn up freshwater tributaries. But anyways, the point is that there's these gigantic brook trout that do that. They live in Lake Superior and the Nipigon River, and they'll run up the Nipigon River. They're some of the biggest brook trout in the world. Puckasaw River, a bunch of those other rivers, Lake Superior Provincial Park and the backcountry lakes there. And Temagami has some good trout fishing waters on the Lady Evelyn River. Again, that's an area that you got to hit in the spring, unless you can find some of the springs there. Again, typically more or less, except maybe in some areas, northern Quebec on Route Nord or something, it's going to be hard to get into good fishing or really any kind of fish, but especially brook trout right off of the road. And you're dealing with colder temperatures. So I highly recommend, bringing some warm clothing, a couple sets of warm clothing. You're going to be wading. You're going to be wanting to jump in and out of the canoe sometimes to pull over beaver dams. So I really like to bring a pair of good Gore-Tex waders, with neoprene socks, and then I just wear my wading shoes on top of the socks, as opposed to more duck hunting waders that have the big rubber boots. I'd bring fishing waders, and a lot of warm clothes. Okay, definitely would bring a 4 season sleeping bag. It's the spring. You're gonna good chance you're gonna be experiencing temperatures that are below freezing at night, or get very cold. Good chance you're going to be dealing with, especially for those earlier trips. Good chance you could get snow. Good chance you're going to be dealing with rain. I remember one time in Algonquin Park, paddling up the Tim River, me, my brother, and Sean James, and we hit just some absolutely frigid temperatures of freezing rain. And we're working so hard. We were using double blades and we were soloing. And if we didn't have double blades soloing, we couldn't have really gotten up the Tim River in the spring without poling or tracking our canoes. And so we were working hard, built up a sweat, and then that rain was soaking us. And whenever we'd stop for a few minutes, we'd start to get cold. Ted and Sean had hypothermia sinking in. We could have pulled over and stopped anywhere and gotten warmed up, but we decided to push, and it turned out to be fine. But it was getting questionable, and we had to light a really big fire and just kind of warm up. So you want to make sure you have enough time. Good idea too. You got a cold day ahead. Bring a thermos, fill that up with some hot chocolate, or I like to just bring hot water in my thermos, and then I can bring a little thing with tea or instant coffee or whatever on the side, and decide what I might want at that moment. But when you're cold, when you feel that cold sucking into your bones, man, let me tell you, something warm to drink makes a big difference. Nowadays some people are saying bring a dry suit. I don't think you really need a dry suit for a trip that's not whitewater based trip, but definitely a PFD, definitely warm clothing at that time of year. And plan your route. I've talked to some people about spring trout fishing before, and they've asked me a bunch of different questions, all these kinds of things. They've gone out, bought in the waders, got all these kinds of things figured out. And I said, how was the trip afterward? And they said, oh, geez, it turned out there's just pike in that lake. Right. So you got to do your research and make sure there are actually trout there. And I would also, if you're going for speckled trout, chances are you're going to be passing some lake trout waters as well. So yeah, I'd bring a good, what are they called? Husky jerk, a Rapala husky jerk. Typically, trout are in more tea colored water, so match the water. I really like Mep's Black Fury Orange Dot. I'm a big orange, black, and orangey brown kind of guy. Same goes with the husky jerk. I've done really well actually on just jig heads and curly tailed grubs as well on the Kasogami River. I was catching 4-pounders on a Mr. Twister grub that was an oversized one. I think it was about a 3-incher. So that's really good. And you consider bringing some spoons. One of my favorite lures is the Williams Ridgeback, baby. And actually Mike Borger, that's what he caught his 8-pounder, the 8-pounder in Algonquin Park, that somebody wanted to know the lake he caught it in so bad, but because he's a smart guy, most smart fishermen, where'd you catch that fish? Oh, right there. Got him right there. You don't want to give away your exact spots. And most people that know, they could probably get a good idea and figure it out and get on some water that's just as good anyways. So you don't like to broadcast this. Well, this guy, Mike Borger, who's this big fishing guide and all this, goes out with his son, slams an 8-pound brook trout in Algonquin Park. And some guy's bugging him on social media so much to the point where he's like, buddy, leave me alone. Well, the guy managed to force freedom under the Freedom of Information Act, get Algonquin Park to lawfully have to give them Mike Borger's route. And somehow the police got involved, and somebody's just like couldn't handle not knowing where he caught this big old fish. So like people take this stuff seriously, right? The other thing I wanted to get into discussing a bit too was other thing I wanted to get into discussing is whitewater, and I wanted to talk a little bit about also just for people that are more that are looking to get into whitewater a little bit, but those are my two kind of spring trips that I like. I used to do some turkey hunting in the spring, but it's kind of hit and miss around me. I have to go down south to get into some good turkey hunting, and my real passion is the whitewater and the backcountry trout fishing. I have a trip this year planned with my brother Ted and Sean James. We're getting that band back together because we had a great trip. It's been a couple years, and we're going to head to some new waters off the North Channel of Georgian Bay, basically just in between, the north side of Lake Huron, north of Manitoulin Island there. We're going to get into some little lakes off of there and see what we can do. But I think one of the best trips I did with my wife, Tori, and that was combining the two. So this is a spring brook trout fishing and whitewater paddling trip. And, essentially, if you're getting into, backcountry trout fishing, it's good to have a canoe. You want a canoe that, that you can sit and cast in. So I bring a prospector, but, a boat that doesn't have any rocker. If you're mostly doing flat water, you're going ultra light, you're single carrying, you're double carrying. You're not dealing with any whitewater. A good trout fishing boat, it's got to be stable. It's not a racing boat, but something that is light and fast is great. Now, when you're combining the two trips, you're doing whitewater, you got to bring a whitewater canoe. So in this case, I bring 17-foot prospector and tough stuff expedition, which for a whitewater material is actually really light. And me and Tori did a trip, Lake Opiongo, into the Crow River. We did the whole Crow River through Victoria Macaulay Lake. We never got into any like really big trout, but we got into spots where we're literally catching trout every cast. Got into a couple decent lake trout, just trolling. Super, super fun. And just like, probably the biggest one I caught. I know there's bigger ones in there, but probably the biggest one I caught was maybe 1.5 pounds. But I was super happy with just the volume. We took the Crow River into the Petawawa, and then we paddled, switched to a whitewater trip, and then paddled the Petawawa the rest of the way across the park to McManus Lake through Lake Traverse. We did the whole trip the weekend after May 24 and did not see one person the entire time. It was awesome. Hey, honey, you remember that trip? Tori's right here. Do we have any? Are you fielding some questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say before you move on to whitewater.
Okay.
Answer some fishing questions?
Yeah. So Tori's just reminding me. She's coming down the stairs there, reminding me before I move on to more whitewater specific component of this adventure is I'm going to answer some more trout fishing specific questions. So Tori's been fielding a few of them. So whenever you're ready,
They'll pop up there.
What's that one? Done it. Local news told us, dude. Okay. Hey, Jim. Grant here. Do you prefer spoons or spinners for trolling for lake trout, or is it dependent on location? So do you prefer spoons or spinners for trolling for lake trout? I would, geez, you know what? Okay, so if I'm trolling from a canoe in the summer, and I'm in where the fish are deeper, where the lake trout are deeper, what I'm doing typically, I don't run dipsy divers so much as I run the 3-way swivel rig. So I have a 3-way swivel with a lot of weight. I typically use smaller pound tests because that smaller pound test can cut through the water more easily. And I have a swivel with 3 eyelets on it. The bottom eyelet is just an own separate line hanging some heavy pencil sinkers, and then a line out the back. I like to use a small spinner for that rig because it gets deeper than a spoon. Even a big Len Thompson, somehow that gets you bigger. Now I've fished that rig successfully around Slate Islands in Lake Superior, where we only had to get down 10, 15 feet deep using a big 5 of diamonds Len Thompson. But so for that rig, I've caught in Lakers in the dog days of summer in Southern Ontario at 80 feet deep repetitively, right? So that I use a number 2 because that for some reason that small spinner, a small sinking minnow lure would also work, but for some reason that spinner doesn't get hung up as easily. Though typically, yeah, I troll a spoon if I'm flatlining. Typically I would go, in my mind, I go Lakers, but I've done well on spinners as well. My only problem with some spoons is that they can bird's nest, and spinners do that too. Once you have a MEP spinner, as soon as you get like a kink in the stem of it like that, it starts spinning like this, and the next thing you know, you're bird's nested, right? So I like to rig an extra swivel and try not to get bird's nested, and just make sure my swivel's working. But yeah, I think typically I do spoons is what comes into my mind for trolling for Lakers. Now I have started using something differently because there's all this talk about dipsy divers. My cousin Brad, who's just like an epic, should be a pro fisherman. Check out Canadian_living on Instagram. He's done well with dipsy divers. Some other guys, that I know that are hardcore canoe trout anglers swear by them. I just thought, well, why not just bust out a freaking Rapala tail dancer, right? Or, a cotton cordell Wally stinger. Essentially, they're doing the same thing as a dipsy diver, because we're talking about hard baits, like so hard-bodied minnow lures, but they have an enormous bill on them. And so that Rapala tail dancer, if you're trolling, I forget what the speed is, and if you have an exact number of line out, I forget what it is off the top, but you got 100 feet of line and you're trolling at like 4 kilometers an hour, that thing is getting down 30 feet. So I've had luck, not too far in Northern Ontario, Temagami area. I've had luck slamming Lakers in the middle of July on cotton cordell, probably a Wally stinger. Geez, that probably gets down 15, 20 feet. You know what I mean? So I've had luck slamming Lakers on them too. So I find for summer, instead of using a 3-way swivel, which I still do, or a Wally diver, I just slam on one of those. But be careful, because they're like $24 lures, the big tail dancers, and if you lose one, it just kind of breaks your heart. So hope that helps. Any more trout questions, Tori? I just got my laptop screen down here so I can see your comments kind of popping up. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at the questions in there. And Tori is doing some parenting upstairs. Very, very thankful with the 2 kids. And she's also trying to help field some questions as well, to let me know what they are. Before we move on, will I need a passport, and what other special licenses and permits would I need? Also, approximately a price range for a week or so. This guy, William, hey William, thanks for the question. Yeah, so if you're coming into Canada, unfortunately, probably for the last 15 years or something like that, Canadians and Americans have needed passports for the most part to travel back and forth. We didn't used to. So you will need a passport to come into Canada. You will need to buy a fishing license. Every province and territory has different fishing regulations and different licenses. Ontario, Canada huge place, some of the best freshwater fishing in the world because of the number of lakes, especially northern Ontario and the Great Lakes, right? Like crazy. But Ontario has the more expensive fishing licenses. I usually just buy the 3 year every time. But you know, I think you're looking at about $35 for an adult, and you can buy the conservation or the sport fishing license. As a non resident, it's going to be a little bit more. But you know, guess around the $40 for a year mark. Now, if you want to come and do a guided trip, as in you're asking how much money, there's all kinds of answers to that, right? If you want to do a guided trip, a fishing trip, if you want to do a fly-in fishing trip with guides and boat rentals, I mean, you can pay thousands of dollars for that. If you want to drive to Algonquin Park, buy your fishing license right at the park office, you know, schedule your trip before at Algonquin Park somewhere you can actually go in and you can book your campsites per lake, and that will mean you're for sure to get a campsite on that lake. Plan your whole route, bring your tent, bring your gear. Now, if you're American and you're camping on public land in Canada, you need to pay now. It's a new rule. I kind of don't think it's a great rule, but you need to pay, or you need to engage the services of an outfitter to come to Canada and camp on public land. So, you know, you could basically bypass your need to be paying a nightly or daily fee to camp, which I think is like $10 a day. It adds up, by using an outfitter and just renting a tent off of them or something like that. And, you know, so engage an outfitter, rent a tent, it'll be cheaper, or a canoe, maybe rent a canoe, it'll be cheaper than paying money to camp. So, you know, I guess the answer is anything, you know, from, you know, $1,000 to, if you want to do a fly-in trip in the Queen Charlotte Islands and catch, you know, 40-pound king salmon, you know, you could be paying $12,000. That's at the other end of it as well, right? So, you know, good trout fishing trip, Temagami, Algonquin Park, depending on how far you drive, pretty reasonable price if you're willing to sleep under canvas. Hope that helps, William. Jim, what is the spice you put on your trout when you cook them? Great question. So I go with Old Bay seasoning. Old Bay is a game changer. To me, Old Bay on trout is kind of like when I discovered fish crisp for walleye and bass fillets. And the other one that you can also add to it too, and Old Bay is like a New England, you know, people put it, it's a seafood seasoning. People put it on, you know, crabs and lobster and all kinds of seafood stuff. It's famous, it's from New England. But it to me is the best for trout. The other one that's really good is it's Uncle Buck's. So it's a Bass Pro Shop brand. I think it's called Uncle Buck's Hot and Spicy. And it's actually like a catfish shake and bake, like a dry breading mix. You know, you basically would take a fillet, you coat it in Uncle Buck's spicy, and then you cook it in hot oil. I find some Old Bay and some of that Uncle Buck's Hot and Spicy used as seasoning. Some people are like, why are you using so much seasoning? Well, that's probably this Uncle Buck stuff they see me putting on. So it's not actually a seasoning, or else it would be totally overkill. It's actually like a breading, but essentially I'm just using that to give the fish a little bit of a kick. So it doesn't have that much flavor, but it's actually, I'm not even using it how it's supposed to act. That was a little tip from my cousin Brad as well. That was an epic little tip. So yeah, but typically Old Bay, baby, all the way. Game changer. You got to try it. So here's another one. What length rods for the streams and the lakes? Jason's asking me. What length rods is a good question. I'm probably using about a 6-footer for the streams and the lakes. You know, you're getting into those streams and you're fishing from shore. You're kind of going to want something that's a little shorter, a little more maneuverable. But for backcountry trout fishing trips, I really like to go, and for all kind of canoe trips and backcountry trips, you know, to me, that's when you leave your sort of high end more breakable graphite rods at home because they break out there. Yeah, they absolutely have a much better feel. You can feel those little, when you have a motorboat, you can keep them safe. But when you're trudging through the bush and stuff like that, I like something more durable. So I'm a big fan of Ugly Stick. Ugly Stick, just a breakdown telescopic rods, a Bass Pro Shop telescopic rods, probably a little more heavy duty than trout, but yeah, I go with an Ugly Stick light for my trout fishing trips. You're looking at probably about a 6 foot rod around there for trips where I'm going after stuff that's a little bigger on average. Again, I bring one of the newer age Ugly Sticks as well, just because they don't break, and you know what, they don't break the bank either. But I do invest some more in a good reel. I find that unlike rods, more expensive, more high quality reels actually have better durability, whereas more rods that have just a little more sensitivity usually break more easily. So with an Ugly Stick and a good rod, man, like the world is your oyster. So I hope that helps. Oh, we got a message here from Dennis at Canoe Hound Adventures. When you're trolling in a canoe for lake trout, are you slowing your paddle strokes for a slower speed or maintaining a regular stroke? So yeah, you're gonna want to troll slower when you're trolling for trout. Okay, you're trolling and there's two reasons for that. Typically, the trout can they're maybe not gonna hit something that's necessarily moving as fast, but also when you go slower, it typically allows you to get a little bit deeper. And when you're flatlining, that's particularly important. Early spring, you'll see the perch fry, the lake trout will come up and they'll be eating perch fry. You're going to be catching them at like 12 feet deep in the earlier spring like that. Another great way to troll is when you have a bit of a wind, and you just let the wind blow you right across the lake, and you use a tube jig and a weighted hook in that tube jig, and you just jig like this. You let it go down, you do one pass across the bay, paddle back around, float back, just keep using letting that wind troll you. So that's a good speed. I couldn't tell you exactly what the speed is, but that being said, you're 100% more likely to catch a fish when your line's in the water than when it's not. So I remember one time I paddled across Lake Opiongo. I don't even remember what time of year. I think it was in the summer. Yeah, it was right in midsummer. Tori and I did this big trip into, not big as in days, but a lot of paddling. And I left my three-way swivel in, and I paddled right across Opiongo. Sometimes I was paddling fast, sometimes I was paddling slow, but I wasn't paddling in such an area where I really knew I wasn't going to get hung up. And bam, I almost forgot it was there. Bam, caught a 3-pound lake trout. Absolute beauty. It was awesome. Boats that had professional fishing guides and flashers and everything hadn't caught anything, and here I was in the middle in a canoe and caught this beauty. So yeah, sometimes you might be paddling too fast, but I think as long as you're not bird's nesting or it's not becoming too much of a pain in the ass, if you're in the stern, you can kind of put it behind you. It probably makes sense to have that line in the water. But so I guess I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it does. Best way to prepare and cook trout. So I would say the best way to prepare and cook trout while you're in the backcountry, it kind of depends on the size of the fish you cook. Now, typically with the smaller size fish, what I like to do is just slit right from the asshole right up to the bottom of the neck here. And then what I'll do is I'll stick the knife just through that little thing here, right there, through there, and I'll cut out this way. You can check it out in some of my videos. I do it on a fish, not on myself. And I grab that little tab and I just pull that tab, and I pull out the gills. Pull out the gills, tear out all the innards, tear off the front fins, all in one shot, and get rid of everything. You can lose some meat around the fins if it's frozen, so be careful. It's best when it's not frozen. Then on the inside, now that the trout's open, you're gonna have what's the bloodline. I forget, it's an organ of the fish, a liver or something, and you're gonna want to scrape that bloodline out with your thumbnail. Then just rinse it out, and you can literally do all this with like just a pocket knife. You don't need a fancy fillet knife. But for a bigger trout now, I hate wasting any of the meat. It's so good. So what I do, some people will fillet them. I like to butterfly them. So butterfly them, essentially you start with what I just explained, but then you'll actually cut up on the inside of the fish, in between the meat on the side, the fillets essentially, and the bone, and you'll cut like that and then separate the meat from the bone like that. And you'll flip it up, and so you'll have the fish flat with the rib cage sticking out. Then you cut that rib cage out, and then essentially you have the whole fish opened up like that, butterflied with no bones in it. If you're really nitpicky, you can tweezer out whatever bones are remaining, and then you fry it like that. The other way, you can do it is in tin foil, and that when you do tin foil in the fire, essentially you're baking it. So it would be a very similar thing to doing it over a reflector oven. If you're at home and you have an inside oven, baking trout is a great way to go. Baking trout and salmon in the oven, especially the larger ones. It's easier to cook them when you're frying them because, frying them, you have the inside will be underdone and the outside will be overdone on some of the large ones. And that's why butterflying them is better, because then more of that meat's touching. You're not trying to cook through such a thick part of the fish if it's still whole. I hope you're following me here. And the third way to prepare them is, now you can do this with fillets or butterfly. I typically will butterfly them to do this, is the Pacific Northwest salmon barbecue method. This is the best if you have slats of cedar, but you don't need it. And essentially what you're doing is you're just suspending it over the coals or over the heat of the fire. It's a little drier, but a little more smoky flavor. It's the same thing as trout on a stick too. So, without getting into detail, you're essentially using sticks to cook a small one whole or a larger one butterflied using a split stick and pieces of wood like this tied together, and you're suspending that over the fire. That's a really fun one to try because it's really bushcrafty. It's cool. You don't need to bring any fancy things with you, but it's really tasty too. So I hope that helps. Man, you guys are making me hungry now. All right, let's see. We'll do another question, then we'll move on. Biggest lake trout. What's my biggest lake trout? Nothing crazy, I don't think, but probably about 20 pounds, I guess, is when I was up on Great Slave Lake. And the crazy part about that is that I just caught it from shore too, near Plumber's Lodge, just on Great Slave Lake. And I talked to a guide that was there afterwards. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's all the only small ones at this time of year, so they get huge up there." But I've never really caught like one of those giant tank lake trout, and a lot of that has to do with, for the most part, where I grew up, they're very rare. In the Bancroft area of Ontario, lake trout for the most part that size were pretty rare. If you're catching like a 4-pounder, you're doing pretty freaking good. I've caught multiple ones around the 10-pound. I caught a 10-pounder ice fishing in Great Bear Lake. I've caught in the Arctic and the Yukon, places in the north and northern Ontario and stuff like that. I've caught some bigger ones too. So yeah. Okay. And remember, everyone, tread lightly. That's a good thing to say. Tread lightly. It's like the leave no trace. When you're out there and you're trout fishing, try not to trash the place. Let's see. That was a shameless plug for Muskoka Brewery, who is so delicious. If you're not familiar with Muskoka Brewery, I highly Okay, sorry, I'm getting off topic. If you're not familiar with Muskoka Brewery, I highly suggest checking them out. Which reminds me, now that we're getting into our other topic here, I'm going to crack another one here. This is a Detour. I like Detour because it's an IPA and I like the flavor of IPA, but it's what they call a session IPA. So it's only a light beer technically. So it's 4.3%, which is significantly less than a regular Canadian beer, which is 5%. But you get that full IPA flavor. But a lot of IPAs are like 7%, which is just like too much sometimes. Okay, so got some noti poos here. Yeah, we're getting into whitewater. Okay, so a lot of the time, why do whitewater? Why get into it? People ask me why. For me, it wasn't really about like why get into whitewater. It's just sort of like a way that I could see more stuff, that I could do more stuff, that I could experience more rivers, that I could paddle more routes, experience more wilderness, more backcountry, get into different fishing spots, and in general, just be more confident when I'm on the water and being able to kind of look at a map and be able to go anywhere by canoe in canoe country because I know I have the kind of skills to go there. So that's primarily why I wanted to learn whitewater and why I got into it is because where those skills could take me rather than just enjoy the fun of paddling whitewater, I think to me probably comes second to this day. And so because of that, I think it's worth getting into, even if you don't want to do it and you don't like whitewater, because it's just worth it because of that reason alone. So, so spring, great time for whitewater because, that's when the snow's running off and a lot of the rapids are more runnable. Where later on in the season, those rapids will be dry and there is no rapids there. So, in the spring, if you want to paddle some of these rivers, there will be rapids that will present you with a challenge there. Most of the time, 90% of the time, these rivers can be portage. But a lot of rivers are pushy and you need some moving water experience because there's just strong current leading up to rapids. You got to know how to handle moving water if you're going to tackle some rivers with strong current, even if you're not going to even if you're not planning on paddling the rapids. And if you just want to get out and explore some of these areas in the spring, maybe you want to get into a trout fishing river, but there's whitewater, not a bad thing to understand and learn how to navigate in moving water. But there's definitely some challenges that come along with that. And essentially, probably the first thing you're going to want to look at. Also, if let's say you're getting into it. So what are the dangers? Let's say of jumping into whitewater, into spring water. Well, it's whitewater, so your odds of dumping are significantly increased. I mean, right? That's a no-brainer, right? So then also the water is cold. So that's a challenge, right? So, that means that if you're smart about it, running stuff where you might dump, you're going to want to wear a wetsuit or dry suit. For years, I wore wetsuits. And then I realized nobody was doing that except me and my brother. Everybody was wearing dry suits. Well, dry suits are like $800. A wetsuit's like $100, right? So that was a lot more practical, and probably it made me learn faster because it was more scared to dump. So I started paddling spring whitewater rivers in April, just wearing a Farmer John dry suit, and it's very doable. But you're going to want to wear some sort of wetsuit or dry suit when you're starting out. Great time though, if you don't have that, you don't want to do that, you don't want to deal with the cold water, is late season whitewater trips. So we're talking about like beginning of June when, right to the point where you're like, oh yeah, this water's fine. The weather's a lot warmer outside. That makes a big difference. If you have a cold dunk and you get out of the water and now it's freezing cold out of the water, you're way more likely to get hypothermia. And just like with spring trout fishing trips, it's not winter where people get hypothermia, it's the spring, because spring has those nice days where people think, oh, we're good, let's go off into the bush, and they follow some trout stream and they take a branch this way and they get mixed up and they don't have the proper stuff with them. They get lost on their way back, then it drops down below freezing after they fall in or something like that, and that's where hypothermia deaths happen, is more in the spring than in the winter. So you got to be careful about that. But yeah, that beginning of June, every year is different with water levels, but beginning of June into June, some years, mid-June, you can still have good water levels, and you don't need that dry suit because the weather is warm and the water's warm. But if you're getting into spring whitewater, yeah, you're going to want wetsuit or dry suit. You're also going to want a different canoe. It's probably not a good idea to take your, ultralight, expensive Kevlar canoe that's so great for your backcountry trout fishing trips when you're going to tackle rapids above like a class 1, and even that, right? So, you're going to want a canoe that's made out of Royalex. Some of the, the plastic canoes, they're heavier. They can take a few lumps too. They're not expedition grade. They're not going to wrap around a boulder and kind of bounce back to shape, but they can take some lumps. They can take some scrapes. Tough Stuff Expedition is what Novacraft makes. They are what I think is the best, because you now have a material that can take a serious beating in whitewater, can wrap around a boulder, can be pulled off, and you can still use it to get out of the bush. Now, it's not going to be, if you wrap a Tough Stuff Expedition canoe, you don't pull it off and then use it and it's almost the same forever. Like, it's pretty much beat up. It'll get you out of the bush, but it's not going to be a great canoe. Now, I've wrapped a Royalex boat before to the point where the floor came and smashed out the carrying yoke, and we were on the Puckasaw River, North Shore Lake Superior. That was day 1. We got the canoe off. We got out of there fine. The canoe was never quite the same, but the rocker was a little not quite the same, but it was used on many whitewater trips after that. But at the same time, you have one of these Tough Stuff Expedition canoes. Instead of having to have a Royalex boat for whitewater and then have, a lighter boat for your trips, for your lake paddling trips, where you don't need to carry this heavy boat. Basically, what Tough Stuff does is it more or less gives you 2 boats in one. So before I had this Royalex boat, and then I'd have to rent a light boat if I went to somewhere like Killarney Provincial Park in Northern Ontario, where there's a lot of portagings, no rivers, just lakes. I'd rent one. Well, with the Tough Stuff, you can really just have one canoe for 2 things, which is what I love about it. The other options are T4Mex is like Royalex. You can't get Royalex anymore. They don't make it. It probably was the best. I still have a bunch of Royalex boats that have gotten quite a beating, but yeah, you're going to want a Royalex boat. You're also going to want a boat that has a little bit of a rocker. I really like the Prospector. It's a boat that is basically exactly taken from the indigenous birch bark canoes of the Northeast, the Algonquian bark canoes that eventually were made into, the same models were made into wood canvas canoes, and the Chestnut Canoe Company was the first company to call it a Prospector, and then they went under, and then everybody started, manufacturers all started calling canoes that looked like this Prospectors, but the design, the type of canoe has been around for thousands of years. They're just made out of different material now. And why they're good is they got a lot of volume. They can take a ton of weight, so you get a ton of backcountry stuff. They're good to fish out. They're not too tippy, but they do have a bit of a rocker, maybe about 1 inch or so of rocker, which means they're maneuverable, but they're not so rockered that they're too challenging to paddle in flat water. And so what makes, just like a hockey skate, the more of a curve in a canoe, the more maneuverable you will be. The flatter, the faster you will be, but the less maneuverable you will be. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. But if you want to get more into whitewater specific stuff, you can get a whitewater specific boat. I have the Moisey, which is 16.6, which is just freaking awesome. I solo it too, and the rocker in it just makes it so much easier, especially with a full load, so much easier to steer. But if you're just getting into whitewater, I mean, you just rent one. you choose a river or a place where there's people that rent canoes. They'll have the canoes that are available for whitewater. Start by renting it. That's the way to go. You don't need to make the investment. And, you're going to want the other thing that's important if you're getting into whitewater too, you want to pay extra attention. Pretty much everybody uses dry bags for the most part now, or a good bag liner. But if you're getting into whitewater, especially in remote areas and all that, like waterproofing your stuff is just the way to go. We have the waterproof bags. They're not as expensive as high-end backpacks at all. And what I do, and this is my fail-safe waterproofing system for wilderness whitewater trips, okay? And what I do is I take a dry compression sack. A dry compression sack is a compression sack that rolls at the top, and it is essentially waterproof now. It rolls up at the top, and a little cap goes on, and there's webbing all around the outside, and you tighten it up like this, and takes your sleeping bag, it crushes it down to like that, or your clothes, crushes it down small, and waterproofs it, right? Then I take a large, top-loading dry bag with shoulder straps, and I line that dry bag. So Barrel Works makes really good, Recreational Barrel Works makes really good bag liners that you would use on a typical flat water trip. You'd use the one liner inside a backpack just for rain or whatever, but putting one of those inside a dry bag, now you're laughing. You don't have that. Carpenter's bag works great. You just get a contractor's garbage bag. Use a contractor's bag, put that in. Then you're putting your dry compression sacks in with your clothes and your sleeping bag. Your tent and stuff can go in there too. Doesn't matter if it gets a little bit wet, whatever. But that way, no matter what, everything's triple waterproof. You can tie that contractor's bag up with a piece of parachute cord, a piece of, a little piece of bungee cord or whatever, surgical tubing. Make sure you roll that dry bag up really well. And now you have something that even if your canoe gets like pinned on a boulder and is submerged for like 2 days, you're still going to have a dry, warm sleeping bag and warm, dry clothes. So that's really important. You're also going to want a whitewater specific paddle. Anybody that's watched my videos, you probably see I use spray decks. Spray decks are a lot of fun. Now, what a spray deck is, and a spray deck is essentially a glorified tarp that fits over the top of your canoe. Because a lot of the time when you're canoeing rapids, it's not so much tipping you need to worry about, it's swamping. Whereas if you're in a kayak, you're in essentially a big flotation device. And you can bomb over big waves up and down, and those waves will splash into your boat and fill it up with water. So even if you don't tip in a canoe, you get a bunch of big waves, boom, boom, your canoe's full of water. All of a sudden your gunnels are under the surface of the water, and you can't steer anymore, and you're swimming in moments, right? So what a spray deck does is it's basically a custom-made tarp that fits over the top of the canoe, and it attaches to anchoring points that are installed in the canoe's hull. And that way, if you hit a big wave, that wave will splash on top, but it'll shed off and it won't fill up the boat. Now, it does not provide any buoyancy in any way like a kayak will, and water still gets under, still gets through. So you could take like 3 waves as opposed to 1. It's not your saving grace. Also, a spray deck is not going to help prevent you from tipping. And I've seen it before where people that are kind of new to whitewater, they'll get a spray deck and they'll be like, oh, we can run that, we have a spray deck, and they hit some weird current and they tip. So that doesn't help you at all. But if you learn how to brace, which I'll explain a bit, which only really comes with experience. Like bracing is one of those things you can kind of like read up on a lot and understand it. But when you're just in that washing machine of a crazy rapid, one day it just clicks, and all of a sudden you're doing a wicked cool ass, front cover of a paddling magazine, high brace or low brace. But you can read up on it when you're out there. I don't know. It's just one of those counterintuitive things that you just get. And once you have a spray deck on and you know how to brace, you really now have something that's going to be safer in remote areas when you're paddling whitewater, because you won't swamp as easy. It protects you, holds your gear in the canoe better. and in general just enables you to up your whitewater game. And let's be honest, it does help, when you screw up a little once in a while, as I'm willing, I'm not ashamed to admit. Sometimes, I'll be paddling and I'll hit a hole or something, and we'll almost be full, even though we have the spray deck on. I'm like, if I didn't have that spray deck on, we would be swimming. So it definitely helps like that. Means you can run more stuff. There's so a lot of people ask me, Jim, how did you learn all this whitewater stuff? Well, first of all, talk a bit about a brace. Why is a canoe able to run these rapids? And let me tell you something, if you're into fishing too, a lot of the time that fishing is good at the base of the rapids too. So if you can run a rapid, eddy out into the eddy, it's a good way to move downriver and catch a lot of fish. But how did I get good? How did I get into it? Sorry, that what I was saying was not how did I get into it yet, but why is a canoe? I thought canoes were tippy. Everybody's so scared of canoes. Oh, canoes are tippy. Well, yeah, they're tippy, but it's the ability to move, to use your body essentially as an outrigger that makes them, that makes them not so tippy, right? So, a big Chris craft or a big boat that you go down a rapid in that, and you're not going to be able to steer it. It's going to go sideways and hit a boulder and fill up with water, or dump, or a big lund like a tin boat. Why can a canoe run these rapids? Well, that's because once you know how to trust the weight of your body outside the gunnels, all of a sudden you're essentially using your body as an outrigger. So you can throw your body weight out of the boat, brace yourself if you start to tip, but then bring it back into the middle and slide between two tight little boulders that a bigger boat would just crash into. And that's why a tippy canoe is way better at running rapids than a big non-tippy boat, because it could be new because of the skill of the paddler. Right? So essentially what you're doing is you're using the resistance between your paddle blade and the water to prevent you from essentially falling out of the canoe. So as soon as my canoe dumps towards the side, if I'm paddling on this side, as soon as my canoe dumps towards the side I'm paddling on, what most people do is the counterintuitive move of trying to center your gravity and holding the gunnels. So you let go of your paddle and you grab those gunnels. The last thing you want to do is grab the gunnels. In fact, when you're starting to dump, any stroke is better than no stroke. So what you do is you, in fact, throw your body weight out of the canoe and you slap the back of your paddle down on the water and you push yourself back to right like that. Same thing if you're falling this way, what you do is you throw your body weight out this way. And so you're essentially throwing your body weight out over the opposite gunnel, and you're catching yourself and riding the canoe like that. So learning to trust your body weight outside of the canoe is essentially what makes a canoe not tippy. And because you're trusting, and it comes with experience, but you're essentially using your body as an outrigger. A good way to learn that is by kind of starting back paddling. A lot of people think, oh, you just paddle down the rapids full speed. Actually, you can get control by paddling faster than the current, but especially when you have a lot of weight in the boat, you get control. It's a better idea to paddle slower than the current. So if you're paddling at the same speed in the current, just like when you throw a stick in the river, it's just spinning around. It doesn't know where it's going. But when you're paddling backwards or forwards, that's when you can really start to get control. When you paddle backwards, your canoe, hard enough in current, your canoe will start to drift sideways. Your net movement will be sideways. When you point your stern towards where you want to go and you back paddle hard, the combination between the side wash in your canoe, the strength of the current, and your paddling strength mixed with the angle of your canoe. If you get that right, you can be going down the rapid really hard, and you see a rock coming. You put your canoe onto an angle like that. You paddle backwards. You just go straighten out again and go like that, and that prevents you from having to turn like this and turn like that and do two turns. And that's why that's what one of the skills that canoeing has, where it means you can paddle large loads. If you know how to back ferry, that's what that maneuver is called. If you know how to back ferry, you can paddle heavy loads down class 2, 3 rapids, no problem. with that maneuver. So it's an amazing time-honored skill. People are getting better and better at whitewater paddling nowadays on average. They're sharing their skills with each other. In this day and age, it probably can take you, 2 years to get pretty good at whitewater paddling, where back in the day, before the internet, before there's tons of books and stuff on this, you'd be looking at years and years, 15 years to become really good at this, right? So don't be shy, get out there and learn. And the way I learned, I didn't start whitewater paddling till I was probably about 20. I didn't really grow up in an area where there's any whitewater rapids. It was, a headwater lake. There's some kind of rapids leaving a river, far away that we barely ever went to, but no real whitewater in that area. So once I started exploring and wanting to get into some of these new areas, once I got a little older and I started really getting into exploring by canoe, exploring Canada by canoe, I started wanting to really learn that. So I picked up some books. A great one just for expedition planning is called, Expedition Canoeing by Cliff Jacobson. It's now called Canoeing Wild Rivers by Cliff Jacobson. It's not going to teach you the skills of paddling whitewater, but it's going to teach you how to plan a remote whitewater canoe expedition. The other one is called Paddle Your Own Canoe by the McGuffins, and also Path of the Paddle by Bill Mason. And those are the books that more or less will show you how to paddle, a traditional style prospector canoe through intense rapids. And they're all broken down into pictures. And whitewater canoe is one of those things. There's not too many things like this, but you can actually look at the pictures, read and look at the pictures, and then sit there. And this is what I did. I sat there and I visualized it in my mind, how it would go. I'd visualize it in my mind, and then I'd go out there on the weekend. I was a total weekend warrior at this point. I'd go out there on the weekend, and I just paddle whitewater, spent like all my money on it. I paddled these whitewater rivers, dumped a lot of times, and eventually just got to the point where I was more and more comfortable out there and was ready to tackle some of the most challenging whitewater rivers in the country. So I've been paddling whitewater for probably now about 20 years. Last year I soloed the Bonnet Plume River in the Yukon. It's one of the most, probably the most technical canoeable whitewater river in the Yukon Territory. I soloed the Kissaugamy River in Northern Ontario. It's one of the most challenging whitewater rivers in Ontario. I've soloed the Hess River. A lot of times, with river trips, and the Moisey was one of my most amazing trips. And me and my brother paddled the Moisey. What year was it? I guess it's probably 2006. We were pretty young at the time, and it was a big step up for us. We'd already paddled the Nahanni, and that's one of the ways I got hooked into this, because I started getting into canoeing. I started looking at these crazy trips on the internet, and I was like 22, and my brother and I did a self-guided trip on the Nahanni River. Talk about getting hooked, and it was a lot of money. I think it was only $3,000 to do it. I imagine it's way more now, but that was like a lot of money for us at the time. But that just hooked us. So we found this other river, the Moisey, that we could access it by train. It starts in Labrador and it goes down to about Sept-Îles, Quebec. So it's on the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, and it was an advanced level whitewater river. So we really went out and practiced and went and did that river. And after we did that, we no dumps, water was medium low, and we definitely increased our skill. So definitely learning, taking it upon yourself to learn and getting out there and practicing. But when you're planning a whitewater trip, it's a river trip, right? So a lot of the time, these river trip, you're really going to have to figure out how to get, like, it's a point B to point C, or A to B trip. So how do you get back where your vehicle is? Well, sometimes there's people on some of the more well-known whitewater rivers that offer shuttle service. For example, on the Madawaska system, there's a guy, Don Adams. I used to go up there all the time. My family had a cottage in that area. I haven't gone to that. It's ways from where I live now, but he rented canoes. You could park your truck, stash the keys, he'd pick them up, drive it down to where the river ends, and you paddle the river, and sure enough, your truck would be there. He could plan shuttles as well. A lot of people plan shuttles. There's a lot of outfitters that plan shuttles. Naturally Superior Adventures does one on the North Shore of Lake Superior for the Dog, the Puckasaw, the East Puckasaw, the White River, the Mishapicotton. They run guided trips, sea kayaking trips, somewhere like that. You can find an outfitter in the area that will do that. Sometimes you got to get creative. I mean, one time I just started calling local hotels, places of lodging, and local businesses. A bait and tackle shop might say, oh, I don't know. And then you can just, well, do you offer shuttle services? I remember when I asked the hotel, do you offer just a motel in some small town? Do you offer shuttle services? No, I don't. Well, could you do it? Well, yeah, I suppose I could do that. And, you find somebody that's reputable and you call a marina. Marinas are a good place to call. And you kind of got to figure out the logistics. Okay, so we'll meet if you can find somebody at the end of the river, you drive to, road access near the end of the river. That's where you meet your shuttle driver. They get in your vehicle. You drive them to the put-in. Then you get out of the vehicle. You do your trip. You leave them with your truck. And then they drive your truck back to the end where you met them. They park there. They stash your keys, or they lock your keys in the truck. You bring an extra pair. You bring an extra set. You get down there. Your truck's there. You drive home. That's a great way to do it. Of course, if you drive with two people and two vehicles, it's typically cheaper than paying for a shuttle, although, gas prices aren't cheap nowadays either. And it takes longer to shuttle two vehicles back and forth between the beginning and end point. And then sometimes if you're looking at an outfitter to do the shuttle in one of their vehicles, it's typically more expensive. But when they're driving your vehicle, if you pick them up at the end, you drive with them in your vehicle to the beginning, you're driving, they're your guest, then you're out of the vehicle and they're driving the vehicle back. They don't have to have the same kind of liability insurance as if they're driving around their vehicle with clients. So if anybody asks, if they're worried about that, you can explain just that to them as well. The internet, great source of an area to look for planning trips, topographic maps, Google Earth, all these things. You can pan topographic maps online in a couple of places now and dream up some awesome trips. And that's a great place to start. For, southern/northern Ontario, whitewater trips. Sorry for those folks that don't live here. This is a great place for canoe routes, but upper, lower Magnetawan, upper, lower, and middle Madawaska. The upper Mad is an epic. The lower Mad you can do later in the year. There's dams. Upper Mad is an advanced level whitewater run. There is an old, you can actually catch lake trout in the lower sections because they swim up from Bark Lake in the spring. There's a quad trail alongside of it. It's an old railway bed. So you might get a little more traffic in there, but it also provides a good walkout route in case of an emergency. Super fun. Opiongo, that's another one. That's a pushy river and super high water. There's some like legit class 2s, class 3s, even a small, maybe short class 4. But mostly it's just pushy, fun whitewater, but you got to be on your toes because there's blind corners and sweepers. That's a really fun one, the Opiongo. If you time it right, you can do the Upper Mag and the Opiongo back to back in 2 different days if you want to do day trips. The Petawawa in Algonquin Park is it's not a trout fishing river. Unfortunately, it's one of the only places in Algonquin where there's warm water species. But from Cedar Lake down to Lake Traverse, you can do that section, or you can do the section most people do from Lake Traverse to McManus. That section has got some wicked whitewater on it, but it can all be portage relatively easy. You're not kind of pushed into anything. And the scenery is incredible. Tom Thompson, who was, influencer of the Group of 7, painted Natch, Petawawa, Natch Rapids, Petawawa Gorges. Fun. There's a class 4 on it at Crooked Chute. There's a long class 3. Super fun, beautiful place to paddle whitewater, I would say for sure. Then if you want a longer trip, 3-4 days, Petawawa was like 3 days. Tori and I did that stretch in 1 day from Traverse to McManus, but we were kind of pushing. Another great one that can be done again at any time of year because it's dam controlled is the Temagami River, 4 or 5 day trip. You can start from the mine access road at Tetapaga Creek. You can start from the end on Lake Temagami. Really fun, and it goes right to River Valley, Ontario, which is a beautiful little town. Talk to Temagami Outfitting; they'll give you a shuttle. Yeah, so those are a few thoughts on places to check out. Also, coming up is spring breakup, and when I used to live further south, I used to do some of these what they call Highway 7 runs. So they're the ones to become the headwaters and that are ice free a little earlier. They get a good runoff. You get Moira. My favorite was the upper and lower Black River in Hastings County, the Indian River, and there's a Beaver River. There's a couple more that run under Highway 7 in Ontario. Sorry for anybody that, around Madoc there in Peterborough, for anybody that's not from this area. I'm sorry, but those are the kind of like whitewater day trips that are within a driving distance from here. And chances are you probably have some good ones that aren't too far from you either. So yeah, I guess I'll maybe feel a few more whitewater questions here. I don't know how we're doing for time. 9:13. Oh man, I've been blabbing for an hour and 15 minutes. Cheers. I've been doing okay. Hope everybody's enjoying this. Just wanted to plug, I have next Thursday, I'm going to do another one of these live chats again. Same time, same channel. Check it out. And eventually, who knows, I might develop more of a podcast, but I really like the opportunity to just kind of share some of the things I've figured out with you and answer a few questions. And speaking of questions, I might field another couple of questions. I'll probably keep going here for another 10-15 minutes anyways. Okay, tripping and trekking. Question: why do you usually run whitewater in a prospector as opposed to a canoe with more rocker? I ask because of a purchasing decision. So why do I usually run whitewater in a canoe, in a prospector, as opposed to a more whitewater specific canoe? A prospector is more of like a pickup truck, where a more whitewater specific canoe, we'll call it more of a Jeep or an ATV. It's not going to be as good in the flat sections, but it'll be better in the whitewater. It maneuvers so great. I love paddling. Usually use my Novacraft Moisey, which is a 16.6 every year. I've been solo that on some pretty serious stuff. It is a freaking dream. You put a spray deck on that, you throw some bow and stern inflatable airbags in that. It's like incredible. You don't even need a spray deck in it so much because it's just so maneuverable. You just miss everything. But I guess part of the reason that I solo the prospector a lot is a couple things. A lot of the time I'm doing longer trips in it, and for the prospector, essentially typically just holds more gear. Also, on those longer trips, they're not just whitewater specific trips. They're trips where I'm doing a lot of fishing, and I'm cruising in sections where there might be some flat water. But once you're in a whitewater canoe and you try to fish out of it, it gets pretty annoying. As soon as you start, you take your paddle, as soon as you're leaning to one side of it, you take your hands off your paddle, and all of a sudden you jackknife like this just to take a cast. So let's say you're paddling in a prospector, you could be paddling, you put your paddle down, you get out your fishing rod, and all of a sudden you cast, and all of a sudden you're like this. Now you were just trying to troll, all of a sudden you have to straighten yourself back out, and by that time your lure is sunk on the bottom and you got snagged. You know what I mean? Also, with a whitewater canoe, you just always feel a little tippier. So, especially if I'm bringing my dog, I have my dog sitting up on top of the spray deck, and now that center of gravity is higher. It's just not as comfortable. You just feel less, you get used to it in the whitewater canoe, don't get me wrong. But for just like chilling and fishing, definitely the prospector is better. But definitely, I would even say that in most situations, soloing that Moisey 16.6, sitting in the sitting in the bow seat and facing the stern, essentially making the stern my bow, it's almost better. It's almost more maneuverable than soloing a 15-foot prospector. So if you could get, a 14.5 or a 15-foot boat like the Moisey, like a Pocket Canyon, or you're gonna have an epic boat if you're looking at just whitewater. So yeah, that's a boat like a 14 to 15 foot whitewater boat for soloing. That's a boat that I would like to add to my fleet, absolutely. And so for some of those day trips where you see me in my 15-foot prospector, I probably would be taking a whitewater boat. But when you see me on rivers, some people wouldn't paddle the bonnet plume in a prospector. That's hard, man. Paddling the bonnet plume in a loaded prospector. If you had, let's say like, what do they call what are the a little smaller, Novacraft whitewater boat or something like that. Just those small, oh geez, I don't know. I think, well, you know what? I'm going to get a smaller whitewater boat. I hope that answers your question. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. Would love some advice on some first whitewater rapids to do in Ontario. Lots of Algonquin canoeing, but have yet to do more than class 1. Yeah, so that's Steve Kelly. Yeah, Steve, you're gonna be a natural at this stuff, man. If you're out there canoeing in Algonquin, you're dealing with wind and you're a strong paddler, it's gonna be tricky at first. Don't get discouraged. I would definitely try the lower Madawaska. I'd go from Almonds Bay to Griffith in 2 days, 2 or even 3 if you want to take your time and play in the rapids. But I would honestly say that's a really fun stretch. And if you do it a bit later in the season where the rapids aren't too intense, you can get a good guidebook on it as well. And I just say go paddle the freaking lower Mad. Unfortunately, there's a lot more people out there now than there used to be when I started paddling it. But yeah, I'd be all over that. That's a great one, for sure. Hope that helps. Well, it looks like.
Sorry, there's more questions.
Oh, there's more questions. Tori's help. So what's happening? You are answering the questions. I'm looking down. They pop up into my laptop, and then Tori is upstairs fielding them and pops each one into my feed. So she's the brains behind this operation. She's producing this. Garrett goes outdoors. I'm running the Petawawa in early June from Traverse to McManus for about 5 days. Any tips? It's not open, but there's muskie in there at that time of year, but it's not open. I guess my tips would be, there's one rapid, I forget what it's called, but it's like a 2-kilometer long class 1-2 right before this ATV bridge. It's like this old defunct ATV bridge. There's just a horrific mid-river boulder. Stay clear of that. Make sure you get over in time for Little Thompson, which is the first rapid you'll encounter. And another tip is, I don't know how great you are at whitewater paddling, but Crooked Chute is a class 4, followed by a long class 3 that you can put in at the bottom of Crooked Chute, and you're almost paddling right into a rapid, but it all funnels into this enormous hole, and then the river turns hard right. It's almost impossible to miss that enormous hole. Like you try, and you can just barely miss it. So be careful with that. If you're going to try to run the rapid below Crooked Chute, take extra precaution to try to miss that hole. It's a far away, but it's going to try to push you into it. The other thing is, first of all, Natch, wicked campsite. If you can book Natch, it's wicked. I would say also Crooked Chute's a wicked campsite. The Portage Trail kind of goes by it, so you may see a few more people there. I would definitely potentially have lunch there, but there's 2 ways you can do. So Crooked Chute, there's a long, pushy, kind of almost swift coming up to the chute, which is a class 4. And you can come up there and then you can eddy out on the right. Or, you know, you probably want to scout that eddy first before just reading your river notes and blindly looking for it. You probably want to get out. If you're going to try the eddy out, walk down the bank, scout the eddy, go back to your canoe, run it, then eddy out. Or it might be faster just to get out and walk your canoe along shore that eddy, depending on like your ability and skill level. The other thing is, I don't know how crazy you are, but if you want to try running rollway, it's very, very hard. It's an 800-meter class 3-4. It's very challenging to run tandem just because it's a lot of big water. Depending on where the tongue is, though, if the water's higher, the tongue will be further on river right, which means you can potentially sneak the entire rapid. There's a river up, there's a video of me running it, soloing it in a 17-foot prospector, soloing the rollway. And I kind of just basically found a cheat route down the whole right side. And because the tongue was on the ledge on the right, I didn't have to try to get way over to the middle of the ledge, which I would have had to at lower water. And because of that, even though it looked crazier, it's actually easier at a little bit higher water. So there's a couple ideas for a couple different skill sets. One more thing too, since you have 5 days, why not try climbing Natch? You can pull up right at the bottom. You can walk right up to it. You know, you can walk there from the campsite. You pull up to it at the bottom, and you can climb right up there and just get a wicked view. So I would definitely recommend giving that a shot too. Hope that helps. Have a great trip. Jim, just bought the NovaCraft Bob Special. Can 2 guys manage this boat for the spring? So the Bob Special is a beauty boat, super light. It's again was one the Chestnut Canoe Company made in New Brunswick before they went under, and NovaCraft picked up making that classic style canoe. I would say you know, and the Bob Special, it depends on how big you are. I'm honestly too big just to solo it, you know, but I've heard of some people saying no problem with 2 people. It depends on how big you are, how big your buddy is, and how long your trip is, aka how much gear are you bringing, how much food are you bringing. I mean, so just there's too many variables. I think just go practice. Just get in the boat with your buddy and practice. My key kind of thinking is it might be a little tight for 2 people, but remember at the same time, 2 people, that one canoe, you're going to be able to travel pretty far and pretty fast if you can make it work. But I definitely give it a practice run. Just getting in the water somewhere local, do a couple loops, see how it feels. That's what I'd suggest, but have a great trip. Do you ever use thigh straps in your boats? I do. To be honest with you, I haven't for a little while. I outfitted my canoe on the bonnet plume for thigh straps, never ended up using them, but they are freaking great. And the reason is because you kind of just become connected to the canoe. I have up on my YouTube channel, just Jim and Ted run some crazy stuff. It's like a 4-minute long video that I posted like last week, and it shows us running like a spillover dam, just the 2 of us on the thumbnail. There's one there, LaFleur's Dam, which is an old 1930s logging dam on the Petawawa River that me and my brother run. We actually ran both boats down, and we actually bombed down what was essentially a log slide. And when we hit the whole the boat was almost 90 degrees. And we managed to do such spectacular braces that we just flattened out. And the reason we could do that is because we had thigh straps on. And there's been times where, you know, I'm bracing and you have to kind of know, if you don't know how to brace, really there's almost no point. But once you learn how to brace and you learn how to almost pull the canoe at the same time as you're pulling a paddle and essentially control the canoe with your legs, you just become like connected with the canoe in a whole kind of cool way. So I definitely suggest trying them out. Mountain Moon Adventures. Have you ever had a canoe get away on you when you weren't in it? Chase it down the river. Yeah. So when I'm paddling, so the question is, have I ever lost a canoe when I'm on the river and had to chase it down the river? And so I have on only one time really. That was a serious situation. The other time I kind of lost it, but I just sort of, I was with a couple people and just washed up on a gravel bar, no problem. But this is why I think I've called it I heard it called like the Alberta technique. And that's what you do is you take a throw bag and you clip the rope on your throw bag to the carrying handle on your canoe, to the, the rope tow handle on the front, the bow and stern of your canoe. And then you kind of outfit the bow and stern with a bungee cord that you just right on top of the bow and stern kind of little deck plates, and then you tuck, you double that throw bag around and you tuck it under the bungee cords. That way, if you dump, you grab that throw bag and then you have your canoe on the end of the rope. And that rope's like 30 feet, 50 feet long. And then you swim to shore, or you don't swim to shore, but you can control the canoe. The canoe will flip upside down if you have your gear with air in there. You have airbags in it, and you can kind of ferry that canoe by tugging as you're floating down the river into a side eddy, or get out, wrap that rope around a tree, wrap around a boulder, and the canoe will slide into shore. That's the best way to self-rescue, from what I have learned. But one time I remember I was paddling this crazy rapid on the Yukon's Hess River. And honestly, it was stupid. I was writing an article for Explore magazine, and I wanted a photo of me running a rapid. I had somewhere I set up a tripod and a video camera and then run the rapid, but I wanted a good whitewater photo. Well, and I was honestly getting bored because I just kind of been zoning out paddling this long stretch of river, and I was kind of half asleep. And I don't know what the hell I was thinking, because this thing was very challenging, rapid. Well, I decide to run this thing, and I dump on the first wave. I just misjudged going into the first wave and just blew it and hit this curling wave that I was planning on avoiding. So I don't know what the hell came over me. I dump on the first wave, swim this horrible rapid, and right as soon as I dump, usually I just grab my canoe, but as soon as I dump, all of a sudden my boat's gone. And I look up, I can't see my boat anywhere. Well, it turns out my canoe kind of got hung up on a rock for a minute and then came over the rock, and I got pushed way further forward. But the currents and everything and the frothing boils kept kind of sinking me a bit in waves, so I couldn't turn around and swim. It was a rushing class 3 at this point, right? So I got swept way downriver, and I got out and I turned around and my canoe was nowhere to be found. And I thought my canoe was pinned, under an overhanging ledge, never to be seen again. I was wet. I was shocked. I carry a survival kit on my person. At that point, I've never felt like, I've never really realized how useless my survival kit actually is until that's all you have. I remember packing me like, oh, put this in here and this will be a really robust survival kit. And then flash forward, I'm like, oh my God, this is a terrible survival kit, right? Anyway, so I end up walking back upriver, but there's a big kind of bay and then it's mountain country. So I have to scale this like mountain on the side here and get onto a ledge and walk onto this ledge and climb on all fours up over this huge tall point that's probably like 80 feet tall. And I get up onto the top of the point and I see my canoe there, kind of half washed up on shore at the side of this eddy. I'm like, oh, there's my canoe. But as I'm going down to my canoe, it gets kicked off ashore. I'm like, no, crap. Right now, I've already made it down off this point. But now my canoe is in this powerful eddy like this. And I don't want to jump in there and grab it. Maybe I should have, but my better judgment told me not to jump into this eddy because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to swim out of this eddy. Plus, I'm already freaking exhausted at this point. Anyway, so I see my paddle come dislodged. My paddle is on the spray deck. My paddle's floats away. I'm like, oh no, and then I see my canoe, and all of a sudden and I'm running back and forth, like hoping my canoe comes closer to shore where I can grab it. Then my canoe gets kicked out into the main current, and I'm like, oh crap. Now I really have to chase my canoe. So at this point, I have to run back along the eddy, and I have to climb up as fast as I can over this. Now I have a paddle in my hand. I just saw my other paddle get lost. So the last thing I want to do is now lose this paddle. How fast can you really swim with a paddle in your hand? So I climb up, I scale, I go across this ledge, and I basically just plummet down in a controlled fall and just jump into the river. And I start swimming hard. Now, you know, the canoe's traveling at the same speed of the current. As long as I can swim a little bit fast, and as long as no waterfalls are ahead of me, which I knew there wasn't, I knew I'd get caught up to this canoe, right? But oh my God, was it ever exhausting. I'm swimming. Finally, I catch up to it. We wash down, and as I catch up to it, I look for my magic arm, which is this bracket that I bolt onto that I tightly screw onto the front of the canoe, which holds my GoPro, so I can get those whitewater shots. Well, the throw bag had come dislodged in the washing machine of the rapid. It had come pulled out and then wrapped around this magic arm, and essentially maybe got hung up on something and pulled the magic arm out. So I pull up this rope, and there's the magic arm miraculously with my last GoPro. I'd already lost the one on my head, just tangled in the rope, and I didn't get lost. So now I'm holding my GoPro on this big metal bracket. I'm holding this rope and a paddle and the canoe. Good luck swimming to shore with all this stuff, right? So I end up washing down another rapid, nothing crazy, but I washed down another rapid with this stuff. And I managed to hold it together and just use all my might to swim to shore. And man, was I ever exhausted. Over a mile, I think I was 2 kilometers downriver from where the dump happened. And it was in a very canyonous spot of the river. I pulled my canoe over, so I was happy that I got it. And I looked up and I saw my paddles floating by right beside shore. Because, you know, the current had pushed me there more or less. And why wouldn't it push a paddle? So I grabbed it. That was a lucky break. And then I had to walk all the way back to where I left my camera. And I didn't get a video, but I set my camera to an intervalometer setting, so I was taking a picture every few seconds. So I put all those pictures together, and I saw, you know, my canoe spinning around the rapid, and a bunch of pictures of me washing down like this with my canoe behind me. You can check that out. That's in Yukon Wild. It's in my Yukon Wild series on my YouTube channel. So yeah, here's a new question. Tim Wilkins, will you publish some maps or a map book? Would you enjoy some of your knowledge on trips? Would I publish a map book? You know, that's a cool idea. I just you really have to pay attention to all the specifics. So someone like Hap Wilson, when he's paddling a river specifically to make a map book, or all the other people that did the Madawaska river guides or any of those river guidebooks. Laura Archer did some amazing ones in northern Saskatchewan, and those books are a great resource, but you really have to be sitting there making notes. Sometimes you have to paddle the river multiple times. You know, Jeff's map did that on trips and stuff like that too. The challenge is that I'm trying to film them. So the added job of me trying to, I mean, maybe that'd be a cool video, filming myself making the maps. Yeah, I just feel like the added job of me trying to film my trips, because that's my thing that I'm passionate about, and make a map book might just be too much to do all at once. So that's probably something that, in full disclosure, isn't in the cards, at least not now for the time being. But I could see the draw to doing it. And there's also a lot of people that have already done it on a lot of more paddled routes, like Hap Wilson too. So sorry, it's probably not the answer you're looking for. Maybe one day, but not planning on it right now, unfortunately. But thanks. Appreciate it. I'll take a couple more questions here if we have any. Is that it? Any more questions, Tori? Hey, Tor? No? Any more questions? Yeah, where do you get your maps? Oh, sorry, Tim, I didn't see you ask too. So I get my maps, so you can look at the Canadian Topographic Map Index, and it's like a grid, and you can pick by number whether you want a 1 to 50 or 1 to 250. Then you can put those numbers together, and you can call World of Maps in Ottawa and order them. Or Maptown in Calgary and order them. And those are the two places. They'll print them off. All the map data will be printed off. But you can also print them off from a Canadian government website as well. And you can actually treat them, if you have a laser printer, You can treat them with something like Thompson's water seal that gives them some waterproofing. And then you can go and look, if you Google Canadian compass declination, you can actually get an up-to-date map declination, and that's the difference between true north and magnetic north. So if you're traveling with a compass, which is actually better data than what the old topographic maps show, because those maps a lot of the time were surveyed or printed in like the 80s, and the pole has moved, so the declination diagram is off, and then it'll give you some wording on how to calculate it per year, how many degrees in what direction, and you can calculate it to be somewhat accurate in present day, but it's not going to be as accurate as that information that you can get right online, up to date right now. So now I a lot of time I print off my maps and write that declination on it. And anywhere, if you're using the older maps too, that might be a good idea if you're ordering them, which is still my favorite way to do it, just ordering the full maps. You might want to, if there's anywhere we're going to be doing a lot of bushwhacking, instead of figuring out the declination when you're there with your compass, just write it down before you go. That's a good way to do it. But yeah, I still like those. And then what I'll do is I'll also photocopy those. Like I'll photocopy my route, the specific route that I need to go. And then I'll make laminated flip booklets for some of the other people. So I'll carry like the full maps with the datum, and then other people that are on a trip with me might carry the flip booklets, and then I'll write any additional notes on that. So I like to take let's say I'm doing a river where there is a guidebook already. I'll take that guidebook, because usually the maps in the guidebook aren't as good. I'll write all those notes, the Quebec Canoeist Federation notes or whatever. I'll write all those notes, or just a trip report note onto my topographic map before I head out. Hope that helps. Will you be attending Canoecopia next year? Yeah, actually, I was supposed to come this year. Me and my wife were both invited to come and speak, but me and Tori had something we were supposed to do that ended up getting canceled, and it was too last minute to go back, so we were kind of bummed. I hear that there's been a great turnout at all these things. It's a lot of work to do my presentations, and I usually give like 4 or 5 at Canoecopia. That's in Madison, Wisconsin. Anybody that's in to canoeing, that's the place to go. And it's a trade show where you can actually learn a ton, because there's a ton of really experienced presenters, but it's also a trade show where you can actually get good deals on gear still. And so, it's and just meet other people. It's just a lot of fun. It's an awesome time. So yeah, I'm looking really forward to going back to Canoecopia next year. Any more questions, hon? I guess that's about it, eh? Well, it looks like, let me see the time here. Well, it looks like we've gone well over an hour, so we're actually at an hour and a half now. And yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for showing up today. Really appreciate your support. There'll be a copy of this whole live chat posted under lives on the toolbar at my YouTube channel home. You can click lives. This whole thing will, what's that? Oh, also, Tori's just mentioning, I don't want to forget. So our son, Wesley, he's 4 years old. He has Fox G1 syndrome, which is a serious disease. And so he's disabled. And Tori and I are running a awesome fundraiser. So check out at Camp for a Cure, Tori. Were you going to bring Wesley down here?
Yeah.
Okay, bring him down. Yeah. We're going to plug Camp for a Cure. Yeah, so at Camp for a Cure on Instagram. And there he is. Look at this little guy. Look at him. He's a canoe tripping savant, this guy. And yeah, so it's good. It's actually a lot of fun. That's Wesley. It's actually a lot of fun because there's all kinds of cool things that some of my followers and different brands I work with have donated. So there's all these really neat things, and They get posted there, and then everyone can bid on them. So you'll get a cool piece of gear sent to you. You can bid on a number of really neat different things, and all the proceeds go to finding a cure for FOXG1 syndrome. It's a FOXG1
Research Foundation.
yeah, it's the all proceeds go to the Fox G1 Research Foundation, and basically the foundation is run by scientists who have children with Fox G1 syndrome and other really smart folks and advocates, and they're looking for a cure. So yeah, would really appreciate your support there, and check me out there too on Instagram at Jim Baird Adventure and Jim Baird Adventure on Facebook. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and come back next week for another live chat. I'm going to be, I haven't decided the topic yet, but
Next week is next month.
sorry, not next week. Sorry, I keep saying next week. Next month, I'm doing another chat. So a month from today, I'm doing another chat. Thanks, Tori. Oh God. Anyways, yeah. So appreciate the support again, and I'll post, let you all know in advance when my next chat's coming up. Anyways, get excited for breakup and for your next spring trip. I know me and Wesley are. Yay! Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good night. Thanks for tuning in. Tori's gonna turn off the camera. Thanks, hon. Hi, honey.
I don't know how.
Uh-oh.
Close.
Yeah.